Okay, so here we go. On to our content in Chapter 1. So, as I mentioned, all the material is going to be organized in terms of learning objectives. So, in every chapter, I specify a set of learning objectives, and then the videos are going to be organized based on those learning objectives. So, I'm going to cover them typically one at a time every once in a while. Like in this case, it's going to be 2 learning objectives that we cover. So I won't, specifically read through the learning objectives. You guys can read the slides and see exactly what they are. But it's important to know that, I take these seriously in the sense that this is really what I hope you learn. And I use these as guides for designing the homework and exam questions, which hopefully you'll see, right? So if I can answer question 1, or learning objective 1, that's going to help me answer some particular homework questions, which eventually will lead to questions on the exam. So these are good to come back to and sort of look and decide, have I learned learning objective 1? Can I define and describe the concepts of scarcity and scarce resources? Okay, so that said, we'll start with learning objectives 1 and 2, scarcity and understanding the definition of economics and what is macro and what is micro and all this good stuff. Now, to kind of start, so this is actually part of your discussion questions for this week, which is going to be due at the end of the week on Friday. So in your groups, you have to kind of go on there, log on, and type some comments, questions, and discuss this issue with each other. Now, I had this is actually from last year in January of 2020. Well, I guess it would have been just February, first class of the spring of 20 semester. I had asked this question as a discussion question in class. This was back when we were in person before the pandemic. And I just kind of thought, what is an interesting question to kind of highlight what is economics about in a way that's not really about economics, right? So you're thinking economics, it'll be something about businesses or the government and taxes or something along those nature. And we'll talk about that, but it extends beyond that. So in this scenario, there's, you work at an emergency room at a hospital, and people come in to the ER and they're sick and they need medical attention right away. And the issue is that you don't have enough surgeons to operate on all of the patients that you have. So you have a tough decision to make. Whom among these people is going to get the medical care and have their lives saved, and who isn't? And so obviously this is a very difficult decision. And at the time, I just thought it was an interesting thought experiment. And I didn't realize that as the pandemic would play out, this would become a scenario that hospitals had to face and continue to face on a daily basis, right? So some hospitals are taking on more COVID patients that are critical than they can handle. And so they have to decide who gets care and who doesn't. So I want you to just kind of think about what are the trade-offs inherent in this decision and how would I go about making the decision? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's to get you to think about this fundamental issue in economics, which is that we don't typically have enough resources based on the needs for those resources, right? So this was a contrived example, but it hits at probably the most important idea in economics, which is scarcity. So what is scarcity? Well, scarcity is the idea that we have unlimited wants, but limited resources. And so there's absolutely nothing you can do to escape the fundamental fact of scarcity. It's everywhere and it exists in every component of our life. We face scarce resources. So to give you an explicit example, time, right? There's nothing you can do to escape the fact that you have 24 hours in the day and you have a limited total amount of time in your lifetime, right? And so I have no doubt that all of you, if we didn't have scarcity, could earn A's in all of your classes at this university. Why? If we didn't have scarcity, you didn't have a scarce amount of time, you could allocate as much time as necessary to make sure that you've learned everything in economics, everything in your biology class, everything in your English class. You would still have time to work, You would still have time to hang out with your friends. The decision making that you make on a daily basis about how to allocate your time wouldn't be there. Unfortunately, we do have scarcity. So I only have 24 hours in the day. I have to decide how am I going to allocate that scarce resource of time. And so that is precisely what economics is. Economics is the study of scarcity. And if I want to be more specific, economics is the study of how scarce resources are allocated. Right? So in economics, I want to understand or study how you allocate your scarce resource of time. I want to understand how we allocate the scarce resource of ER surgeons or doctors, right? So we have an unlimited want for these things, or typically the wants exceed the amount of resources that we have, and therefore we have to decide how these things are going to be divvied up. And that is fundamentally what economics is about. Now, we get a little bit more specific, the study of scarcity, and we're going to break that study of scarcity into two main parts, microeconomics and macroeconomics. So these pictures here just kind of give you a few of the words that tend to be associated with the different disciplines. So just kind of a different way to visualize what is macro and what is micro. Now, if I want to define these, let me just bring up a sheet of paper here that I can define all this a little bit more clearly. And so here we are. And if I was going to define microeconomics, I would define microeconomics as the study of individual decision makers. Now, that could be a particular person. That's one way that microeconomics is done. I want to study how a person decides how much pizza to buy, or whether to have pizza or burgers, right? That would be a particular individual. And we also study individual units in the economy. So as another example, what's a microeconomic question? Would be I could study employment of accountants. Right? So how do accountants decide how much to work? And what is the demand for accountants? And what is the employment? What is the wage rate of an accountant? That's a particular individual unit in the economy. That's what microeconomics studies. Macroeconomics, as you can guess, based on the name related to micro, is the study of the bigger picture, the aggregates. So macroeconomics is the study of the aggregate consequences of the individual decisions. So the focus there is on the word aggregate. We're going to study the entire economy. And so to give an analogous example to the study of employment of accountants, I want to study the total employment in the economy, or aggregate employment, and what determines that. Now, of course, microeconomics, the study of the individual units, is going to be important to understand parts of macroeconomics. So we'll spend a little bit of time understanding some basic microeconomics and take that up to our study of macroeconomics. But those are the two main branches of economics, and that is the end of our study of learning objectives 1 and 2.